All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to NSHSS's World Betterment series. Tonight, we've got the Why Vote panel. So as people start coming in, if you want to tell us where you're from, I'm located in the Atlanta area in Georgia. So yeah. And what about the rest of our panel here?
I'm in Los Angeles.
I'm in Connecticut.
I'm in DC.
Hi, everyone. I'm in San Francisco, and you can see through my windows, we have a particular scene over here today. The fires are kind of close to us, are giving us a little bit of a sepia filter out there.
You don't need an Instagram filter. It's right there.
Nope.
Caitlin, what about you?
I live in New Orleans.
That is one of the best cities in the entire world.
Yes,
Literally,
I want to go so bad.
It certainly is. You absolutely should when it's safe too. I highly recommend it. I usually like to let people know that anytime around October, like spooky season, is usually a great time to go because the heat has just started to break and there's still tons of festivals going on during normal times. And then there's obviously plenty to do to prep for Halloween and tons of parades and everything. So really any time of year is great, but I think the fall after the heat's broken is pretty nice.
I feel like that would be the perfect time to go to New Orleans. Like spooky season is New Orleans season. I feel like.
Yeah.
So that or Fat Tuesday. That's kind of.
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah, it's certainly a lot, but it's very fun. And, you know, endless food options and music options and just really no stop to entertain yourself.
Beignets, man. Beignets.
Yeah.
Those are dangerous. You got to watch out.
Very
Once you
dangerous.
pop, you can't stop.
Looks like we've got a couple people chiming in from, let's see, we've got Dayton, Ohio, Maryland, Newark, Delaware, Lexington, Kentucky.
I'm looking for anyone in California, but I don't see anyone yet.
Not yet. New Jersey, Indiana. I see that East Coast and Midwest representation going on here.
We got some California.
Yay, Oakley. Colorado. Yay, our first Rocky state. Very cool. Ooh, Queens. Corpus Christi. Coming to you live from all over the place. All right. Once again, everyone, we're gonna kind of wait a little bit for some more people to pop in on the panel itself until we get kind of everybody in here. And then we'll be starting here in just a few. Oh, somebody from Atlanta saying hello. Ooh, Kansas City. I hear they've got great barbecue. I used to live in North Carolina, so I'm pretty used to the tomato versus vinegar debate when it comes to barbecue. Let's see here. Ooh, Arkansas. Woohoo! More North Carolina going on. All kinds of fun things happening. Ooh, Oklahoma. That always makes me think of that Broadway show. Makes me want to start singing about corn and
Do it.
sweeping down the plains. as catchy as Hamilton.
Hamilton
everybody's-
has become the soundtrack of my working day. I don't know how it gets me through the day.
Oh, it's so great. Oh, we've got one of our attendees saying it's so nice to meet you guys and be able to talk about such an important topic. We're excited to talk to you. Very excited. Voting is muy importante. Yeah, I think the weekend that Hamilton came out, I watched it probably 4 times in a row. No shame.
I had the chance to see the show in person, and it's as mind-blowing or even more than the TV version of it.
That sounds so great.
Javier, I was able to go see it in person, having avoided hearing any of the lyrics in advance. I wanted to have it be like my first experience there live, and it was incredible. So if you haven't heard it before, you can still go and have a great experience when all this is over.
I watched it like, I think 6-7 months after it came out, so I already had the soundtrack in my head. Worst idea, because then you're wanting to sing in the middle of the musical. But it's so good.
I'll start counting in my head sometimes, like tasks to do, and suddenly I'm singing the 10 Dual Commandments just out of nowhere. All right. All right. And no worries, attendees. If your camera is not working, you just need to be able to see us. So don't worry about that. All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. It's been a little bit of time now, so let's do it. All right. So hello, everyone, attendees. My name is Nikki I. I am the Scholarships and Communications Manager with NSHSS, and I am very excited to present the next installment of our World Betterment series that we're doing. Tonight's topic of conversation is going to be focused on the importance of voting. We're going to be discussing a little bit of education around the process of voting, some things that you really need to know about it, what makes it so important, and with a really big election coming up, you know, we're less focused on who to vote for, but rather we want you to make sure that you're registered and you get out and vote. So we're going to go through a little bit of some questions going back and forth. And I'm going to introduce our fabulous expert panel here in just a moment as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get that going. And I hope everyone else is having a wonderful rest of their evening. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And all right. So I hope everybody can see everything. We're good? Perfect. All right. So once again, welcome to our Why Vote panel. And again, my name is Nikki I. This is me here. Fun fact, I have a tortoiseshell cat named Sesame, and she has 1,000 other different names as well, as anybody with a pet will attest to. And I reside right outside of the Atlanta area. And just a little bit of some information here. If you're brand new to NSHSS, we are an honor society that is devoted to uplifting and celebrating exceptional students from all walks of life, from all areas across the board, whether you be in high school, in college, or approaching the career world. We want to be able to help you achieve all of those dreams in any way we can, whether it be through expert panel events, webinars, scholarships, and more. So these are just a couple of the things that we offer to our members. And a little bit more about us. We actually were established in 2002 by Klaus Nobel. yes, of the Nobel Peace Prize family. That is exactly who comes to mind and who should come to mind. We've got recently somewhere in the ballpark of 1.7 million members worldwide in over 170 countries. So we are very excited to be able to reach out to our community. So why vote? What's the whole point of it? It's important. It's incredibly important. But beyond that, it's one of the key ways in a democracy you get to affect change, and your voice gets to matter. And you get to be able to put your 2 cents into how you want your society and your community to function. So tonight, that is the big topic on the tray. We'll go through a little bit of some Q&A, and then towards the end, we will take questions from the audience. So attendees, make sure you stick around, because any questions that you have for our expert panel, we'll want you to be able to submit those through the Q&A function there at the bottom. And we're gonna get started with our panelists. So first up, we've got Ms. Reba Hushler. So Reba, take it away.
Hello, I am Reba Heschler. I am board member of Count Us In, and I'm also on staff with Vote Riders. Count Us In is an Indiana-based, nonpartisan nonprofit focused on increasing a larger, more diverse voter turnout. And Vote Riders is nationwide, also nonpartisan, nonprofit, focused on voter ID information and support. Specifically, Vote Riders provides clarity about what each state requires for identification, either to register or at the polls, or if you vote by mail. And we also provide support if anyone needs help getting IDs, whether that's through pro bono legal assistance, logistical work, or even helping cover some of the fees involved. So a little bit more to dig into why Vote Riders was created. There are 25 million eligible voters without a current government photo issued ID. And this disproportionately impacts marginalized communities. It also impacts 18 to 24-year-olds specifically. Estimates are that 18% of that age group do not have a current photo ID with their name and address on it. That's 5 million 18 to 24-year-olds. So there are 35 states in the US that have voter ID laws. They range from very strict to less strict. So that means in 35 states, you need to do more than just register to vote. You need to make sure that you have the right ID to vote, and it can take some time. So if there are only a few things you take away from this today, make sure you check what you need to register, what you need to vote in your state. Make sure that if you need any help getting an ID, we are here to help. You can go to voteriders.org. We will help you in any way. Again, don't wait. It can take time to get an ID, especially if the DMV offices are closed with the pandemic. It can take a long time. So procrastination is not your friend when it comes to an election. That is less than 2 months away. Make sure that your friends and family have what they need. And lastly, volunteer if you can. We have a lot of opportunities with Vote Riders. There are amazing groups that are also talking today and across the nation that could really use your help.
Awesome. Thank you, Reba. And we are going to move on to this guy here in just a minute. Mr. Mike Lamb, please introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here with you all. You can tell that I am fully embracing my COVID lifestyle with my beard and my longer hair. So we're all in it together, I guess. I'm a senior advisor at When We All Vote, and my career has been at the intersection of organizing and education. I was a middle school teacher on the south side of Chicago, and so I was also an organizer on the Obama campaign. And in thinking about how we bridge these two ideas together, the number one thing that When We All Vote is all about is student voice and youth empowerment. And one of the things that we really learned through our research is that just telling a young person to vote because your vote matters, your one vote could be the difference, that doesn't really resonate. And so we don't try and play that game. The thing that we are all about is thinking and talking about voting as one piece of your activism portfolio. We know that there's many things that you might want to do to have your voice be heard. We saw so many people stand up during this summer and make their voices heard in the protest movements that are still going strong. And that is one piece of an activist portfolio. Voting is one piece of that portfolio. And so that's why it's so important for everybody to think of all the different things that you can do. And for us at When We All Vote, our mission is to close the race and age gap in voter participation. And so that means that we are most focused on engaging young people and people of color. And for us, that is most strongly done through our My School Votes program. And that is aimed at high school students who are taking a leadership role in their community, in their schools, to try and make sure that all 100% of eligible students are registered to vote. And so we have over 1,000 national student ambassadors who are doing this work right now in all 50 states. We've had all 1,000 of them join just since June when we went to virtual and digital organizing. So there's tons of people who are joining all the time. Next Wednesday, we have our National Student Welcome Call. Every Wednesday we have that, and so we'd love you all to join. We also have a great partnership with NSHSS to make sure that everyone is registered to vote. So I know they'll be dropping the link in the Q&A as soon as possible to register to vote right now. And in many states, you can pre-register even if you're not going to be 18. So for us, this is a very meaningful time, not just because it's an important election, but because there's so many young people who are wanting to have their voice heard. And many of them have not been included in decisions around whether their schools are reopening in person or virtually. Many of them have not been included in the decisions around whether they were able to have a prom or a graduation or those kinds of things. They were kind of taken out of their hands and adults made those decisions. Well, for us, it's really important that everybody knows that not just presidential elections are up this time, but elections for mayor and city council, who appoint the superintendent of your school district, who appoint school board members who make the decisions about whether schools reopen in person or virtually, or whether you all have the resources that you need, or whether teachers have the equipment that they need if you are doing in person. All of those things are a part of the process that includes not just president, not just Senate, not just Congress, but local elections too. Sheriffs decide so many different things about our day-to-day life and what people are punished for in our country, so often in an inequitable and unjust way. And so there's so many different offices that are important for voting. And for us, it's just really, really important that young people's voices are heard. And so we have lots of opportunities for folks to plug in and make sure that their voices are heard, whether it's through the electoral process or just volunteering and getting involved. We have so many of our national student ambassadors who are either not going to be 18 by election day or are undocumented. And they are standing up for the America that they want to be a part of and that they've always been a part of. And so we take all people who want to stand up and do something and have their voices heard. And that's what our My School Votes program is all about. Right now we have over 500 schools that are going to be running voter registration drives in their school during our week of action, September 21st to 27th. September 22nd is National Voter Registration Day. And so it'll be a huge moment where everybody is coming together. And all of the voter registration deadlines begin October 4th. So we have about 1 month left before those deadlines start, and would love to have as many of you join as possible. So would love to hear any questions you all have, but we are all about having young people's voices heard.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. And now we're going to move on to our next panelist, Mr. Javier Torres. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and taking some time of your evening. I'm Javier. I'm also from the youth voter engagement field as well. The last 5 years before joining Levi's, I spent some time at NSHS America, which is a non-government group that engages on the youth on voter registration and turnout. So I feel like tremendous admiration that you guys are getting your hands dirty on this and looking forward to this election. But recently I joined Levi's to run part of community efforts programs from the employee giving and volunteering, and also some of other corporate initiatives. What he'd been being up to recently, After the 2016 election, our employees came to us and said that they had a big concern of the company not taking a big enough stance on democracy and voting. Throughout the years, Levi's has been engaging on making sure our employees were registered and providing the tools they needed to get educated on the ballot, but nothing formally to the scale that we're doing this year. There's also a picture there of 1994, one of our offices in Texas, nonprofits coming to register. There's also some stories of Levi Strauss himself closing the stores in San Francisco back in the day to make sure employees had the time to vote. So this year we decided to go big and make all the commitments that we could to our employees, to the business sector, and also to our customers. From the employee side, we make sure that our employees have all the time they need to go vote, whether it's on election day, on early voting, or vote by mail. We provide voter registration tools. We provide ballot education through nonprofits. Based on whatever issue you care about, we can make the connection for you to get educated and decide how do you want to vote or who do you want to vote for. We are also rallying the Business Coalition through a organization that we founded alongside Patagonia, Make Time to Vote. This year, our goal is to get over 1,000 companies to join us and pledge to give their employees the time to vote. We are currently over 883 companies, and this is at least 5.6 million employees throughout the US that are now ensured they have the time to vote. And we also engage customers into anyone that comes into our stores, anyone that goes into our website, anyone that receives any product from Levi's has a QR code, a link to learn how to get registered, to how to get access to drop their ballots, to receive a ballot in mail, all those options. And this is also important to the company because we want our employees to feel safe and feel empowered to go out in the community and feel civically engaged. So that's why we do this. We believe that to do the right thing over what's easy. So the company has a long-standing commitment on this, and that's why we do this. And yeah, that's our little spiel, and I look forward to any questions in the Q&A later on.
Thank you, Javier. Right, so now we are going to pass off to one of our actual NSHSS ambassadors, Miss Abnerline. Please take it away.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Abnerline Massenat. I joined NHSSS in March of this year, and I became an ambassador a couple of weeks after, so because applications are over, so I was like, I'm gonna take the opportunity. I am the Black Out Stanford's executive director. That is a community organization in my town that me and my friends decided to put together after we've seen what was happening in our communities and around the world. We really wanted to have a space for youth activism and youth empowerment, and we founded this organization in May, so it's pretty new, and we've done a lot. We've done so far, we have done a 3-day webinar, and those 3 days we focused on the importance of voting, race and education, and healthcare. And especially with NHSSS, we've had opportunities to speak up about our organization and continue to get community outreach even around different towns and cities, having people interacting with us, asking us ways to get involved as well. It's also a space where we want to have activism of all kind, not just activisms of racial justice. We also want things that matters in different communities. We also have plans to have this organization hopefully in different communities around the US, so each part of wherever it is, wherever they can have a a place in a way to just talk about what matters to them. And that's what Black Out Stanford really is. It's just a way to speak up for things you believe is right. And yeah, so that's pretty much about Black Out Stanford. My roles are to just basically recruit members, as well as, you know, assigning tasks to the members and just finding new ways to get interactive, especially in our own community, getting the youth involved, and, you know, giving them a space to just feel safe as well, you know, because racial justice and social justice work is definitely something that can be uncomfortable for most. So we try and be, it's basically a student-led organization. So, you know, we try our best to make it, you know, comfortable and safe, and giving them the opportunities to speak up about things that matter to them. And I'm also the elected board member and student representative for my town division of the League of Women Voters. I joined last year in October, actually, with no experience or no knowledge at all to voting. You know, it was just something that they came into school, you know, handing out information about, you know, the importance of voting and civic engagement. And, you know, growing up, we're taught in school that voting definitely represents an essential part of our democracy, but I feel like even growing up, it's still something that's intimidating to most students, because it's something that's so intricate, and it can be uncomfortable and also confusing to most. So they just push it aside and let the adults handle it. But the League of Women Voters definitely, as a, you know, a nonpartisan organization, they strive to, you know, promote an environment where students can come and express themselves and find new innovative ways to include the youth in the conversation of voting. And they also work to increase voter registration, and they distribute voter information, educational programs and forums. They also help, you know, they also manage to assemble complex issues, talk about those in our communities, whether it's at the library or having a town hall meeting, and just really being there and present in our community, and also going to high schools, middle schools, even from, you know, that point on, and just really educating the youth and really giving them the resources that they need to do what they can, especially at a young age. I turned 17 Friday, so I can't, obviously I can't vote, but I feel like I can still, you know, be that person that can encourage those around me to vote. And that's because of the League of Women Voters. You know, they really gave me that opportunity to express myself, while also actively giving me opportunities to better, you know, my community and myself and my knowledge in voting. And it's been awesome. You know, I've worked on social media campaigns, I've worked with students at universities, and just really also just learning new things about myself and the voting process. And just, it's been awesome. It's been a joyride. And, you know, as a 17-year-old, I just really want my friends, my, you know, the people around me to really understand that your voice matters. And I know it's cliche, and not a lot of people pay attention to when people say you matter, your vote matters, but it's the truth. And I think it's just, there just needs to be a way to emphasize that, and a way to just give you know, the youth a way to channel that energy into their own activism, and doing it their own way, and not just giving them traditional ways to do it. And I think both Blackout Stanford and League of Women Voters definitely gives and drives those opportunities for all students. So yeah, pretty much.
Awesome, Abnerline, thank you. And our final panelist, go ahead and introduce her. Caitlin, please introduce yourself.
Okay, can you hear me okay? I hope. Perfect. Okay. Hi, my name is Caitlin Bowley. I am the Director of Service Learning and Community Engagement at Network Volunteers. A little bit about my background. I went to school at Pace University and worked there for their Center of Community Action and Research. So I did some work there around different take action events that college students might be interested in, as well as voter registration drives, and making sure that college students knew about their right to vote. Even though they're not in their home state, they can still register where they're attending college. So just making sure people were aware and informed about that process, as well as like walking people to the polls, things like that. So that's a little bit about my past involvement. In terms of what I do now, as the Director of Service Learning and Community Engagement, I'm responsible for basically facilitating any and all group volunteer projects through my organization, Network Volunteers. Obviously, the group volunteer projects are on hold right now, just making sure that people know that we're being responsible. But so basically, we're a local nonprofit that was started in New Orleans post-Hurricane Katrina. As many people are probably aware, after a natural disaster, there is a huge influx of support, whether that be volunteers or funds or items. And even though all of it is really well-intentioned, sometimes it may not be directed in the best way. So really what we try to do is just make a sustainable network for those volunteers. And we've now expanded nationally, not just operating within New Orleans, but all over the United States and territories like Puerto Rico. So our mission is to recruit, connect, and manage a network of volunteers and community organizations by identifying impactful volunteer projects and creating turnkey volunteer experiences. So what exactly does that mean, right? To cut to the core of that, we see service as an incredibly effective way of mobilizing volunteers to become allies in creating a more just and sustainable community. So I think often our traditional understanding of volunteering or of service is like a one-time event where you and a couple of friends go to a community center or a local urban garden. And from that perspective, it might be kind of hard to draw the line between like, how do we get from there to voting or to larger engagement? So we like to think that's a little bit what makes our organization different in terms of like a volunteer management organization. So by that, I mean, we really prioritize the learning aspect of service. So within that, I even mean like getting further context about the community that one is serving and concrete steps on how to stay involved. So the hope is that this will inspire people to stay engaged long-term past that one-day volunteering, but really make this a larger piece of what they're doing. So within that learning, we stress that transformational changes require looking at the needs that exist and the systems and institutions that can influence those needs. So I really liked what Mike from When We All Vote said when he said that voting isn't the only piece of a person's activist portfolio. I think similarly, service shouldn't be the only piece of one person's community engagement portfolio. And we really like to stress that service isn't the only piece of that. So we really like to promote this holistic idea of engagement that looks at how we can not only change the immediate circumstances that people or communities may be in, but look at how those systems and institutions operate and how we can affect change. And again, some of that or a large portion of that can be through service, but it also requires other forms of engagement, such as community dialogue, protest and voting especially. So yeah, that's a little bit about myself and network and kind of what we do to mobilize all different types of folks of all ages, backgrounds, etc.
Perfect. Thank you, Caitlin. And thank you to all of our panelists for introducing yourself. Looks like we've dropped a couple of links in our chat function here. So make sure you all take a moment to check those out. And as we move into our moderated Q&A, I'm going to be asking our panelists some questions. Don't forget, you can also submit your own questions in the Q&A box as well below. So be sure to drop some of those and we'll be able to go through some of those as well towards the end. But the first main question I want to ask our panel, and we'll start with you, Reba, is, okay, I'm 18 years old. I'm a first-time voter. I've never done this before. What do I need to know about voting?
You need to know a couple of things. I would say the first thing to know is to not wait. I said it before, but procrastination is not your friend when it comes to voting. Deadlines can slip on by, and if you do need to get a new ID or you need to make sure that your signature matches, that can take time, so don't wait. The other thing I would say is voting can be very easy, but it also takes some effort. You need to make sure that when you're registering, you have what you need. You need to check the requirements in your state. Most first-time voters are required to give additional ID than a voter who's already voted before. What we saw in some of the recent primaries were a lot of absentee ballots and a lot of registration forms in the mail being kicked back because they weren't signed or they didn't include a photocopy of the ID, which some states require. And in some states, you have to also get it notarized. So if you don't know what your state needs, that could mean that your voice isn't heard. So the other thing to clarify about that is there are so many resources out there that walk you through this. Vote Writers is one, When We All Vote is another. There are so many resources to help explain what you need. If you do need a photocopy of your ID and you don't have a printer, you can contact Vote Writers. We will help you do that. There's a lot of resources to help talk you through everything. I'll say one last thing about new voters. There was a study recently that, you know, there's a stereotype that new young voters are apathetic. 18-year-olds have the opportunity to vote, but they don't take that opportunity. This new study actually indicated that a lot of 18-year-olds do want to vote. In some cases, they can't because they don't have the right ID. In many cases, they've found that young voters are intimidated by the process. They feel like they need to know everything on the ballot in order to cast their vote. And while I respect that, there are judges that I don't know about. There are so many measures on all of these ballots. You don't have to know every single one. You can vote on just one candidate or just one issue. The more you know, the better, but don't let yourself be intimidated. There's a lot of great resources out there.
Definitely there are. And I know myself, I mean, there are half the time when I go to the ballot, I'm not really fully sure who all I'm going to vote for myself. So, you know, sometimes you got to do a little bit of that extra detective work on the side. Do any of our other panelists want to chime in with some other information for a first-time voter?
I just want to speak to specifically what you all are saying about finding that information and how difficult it can be. And I think, I don't want to say that sometimes that's even maybe by design, but it can seem exceptionally difficult to get that information. So I'll just say that one resource that I've found that's been particularly helpful for me is like local magazines. Like in New Orleans, we have a ton of local magazines, and even Anti-Gravity is like an alternative press that typically, you know, every major election will offer a voter guide for that election and give as much research as possible, and has a really dedicated team to that. So I would say look to your local publications, and maybe even things that, you know, ideally most things are online right now, but sometimes you can even find those in the coffee shop if it's safe and possible for you to go to a coffee shop. So that's just one resource that's been very helpful for me.
Yeah, I would add to that, and you can make it as fun as you can. Like, I even pre-COVID pizza parties and ballot talking, like we would get around the table and everybody will pull their different like ballot measures, and we'll read through it and what does the ACLU says, and we would just like take our time to learn and educate ourselves. Definitely don't be afraid of it. California ballots, sometimes I think last year we had 17 pages. I still don't know the judges, but I trust the ACLU. So I look at their list and who they support. So find that organization that you trust. Maybe it's a newspaper, maybe it's a local nonprofit, maybe it's your, I don't know, local organizing union, and follow what they say. And yeah, make it fun. Voting is fun. You can make it as fun as you can. Bring your cheat sheet to the voting booth, or if you get to vote at home, bring your friends, socially distanced. And then, yeah, definitely make it fun. Don't be afraid of it.
Pizza and polls. That sounds like a fun day there, Javier. All right, so let's move on to our next question. I'm sure that we've all heard about voter suppression. It's been in the news. It's been kind of a hot topic that, you know, quite a few different outlets have been discussing. And a lot of voters might not necessarily be aware, what even is that? And what are some of those obstacles that voters are going to come across that masquerade as a barrier but are actually tactics of voter suppression. So let's throw this one to Abnerline, because I know that you're one of our younger panelists. What are some of the things that some of these voters might face when it comes to voter suppression tactics, and kind of how are some ways that they can kind of get past that?
That's actually a very good question. It's something that I ask myself a lot because there's so many, different tactics of voter suppression. And a lot of these tactics are targeted toward young people or people who are incarcerated, racial and ethnic minorities, and, just in general, marginalized people. And, when it comes to voter suppression, it's something that's ingrained in our society and has been here for a very long time. And I just think, it's definitely something that has to do with race in America. And it's really disheartening because a lot of people do want to vote, but there's so many barriers that, keep them from, voicing their voice and just giving them the opportunity to go out and vote. I mean, people who are incarcerated, most of them don't have the right to vote, and it's sad because, these are still people, they're still citizens of this country. And we all know that most of the people that are incarcerated are Black and Hispanics. So when you look at it from a large scale, it's like everything is intercorrelated with when it comes to voter suppression and, long lines and people not being able to leave work because their employer won't let them, or that the fact that, election day is not a national holiday for people to just take off and go vote, and long lines and the lack of ballot access. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. It's something that's very, very it's something that's going to be very difficult to, break in our society because there's so many different aspects of it. And I think one way to, fight voter suppression is to be loud about it. Don't be silent about it. Do find ways, participate in your, volunteerism, and just finding ways to really just break the cycle, because it affects our people, and it doesn't give them the chance to, engage with, civic engagement and all that, because it's just something that's just ingrained in our society, like I said before. And it's been going on for a long time. And I think it also discourages people from voting. I mean, half of Americans don't vote. And a lot of those people are Blacks and Hispanics and people who are marginalized. And it's important that we voice our opinions, we voice, and we bring, matters to the issue, because it's not fair. It's not fair. It's really not fair. I know people personally who, especially teenagers in my school, who don't know anything about voting, and also roots from education as well. I think, I think it's important that we have these conversations in school. I mean, I didn't learn about voter suppression from school. That's not something that I learned. That's not something that they teach us. I think it's important from an early standpoint that you talk about these issues, that you give, the students, a viewpoint of what's going on in their society and what's really happening, and why there's that people are not interested in voting, because it's hard for them. It's hard for them to get to the polls because there's so many things that keep them from doing so. And so people simply give up, or they just simply can't. And we look at it and it's like, well, people just don't want to vote. Well, people can't vote because they don't have the ability to, because there's so many tactics from society from decades ago that, keep Black people, that keep Hispanic people from voting. And even elderly, with state ID laws and all of that, not a lot of these people have ID, especially if they're immigrated. And, not a lot of people have those things to go up and, give proof of who they are. And I think it's important that, we give them, just lay back on it and just find ways to just structurally just find ways to help the people and get them, interested, and get them educated, because it's honestly just disheartening. So that's something I would say. Just find out research, do your research, talk to people. There's resources out there ask questions, never be afraid. And, you know, one way or another, we're just going to have to keep going. So
Definitely, for sure. I know I didn't even realize until this past primary season in June, I didn't even realize that, you know, if you request an absentee ballot and you don't mail it in time, you can still put it in the envelope, seal it, and drop it off at your polling place, and your vote still counts. So that's something, I mean, I've been voting since 2008. Uh, and it was the first time ever that I've ever heard that. And I ever knew that that was an option. And that can also be a tactic sometimes that comes across. So, you know, it's important that we draw attention to that for sure. Did anybody have anything else that they wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a lot of what Admiralene said. First of all, you are incredible. You are already changing the world.
thank
And
you.
some of what you're talking about is just so profound. And Caitlin, I think you mentioned this too. The only reason why voter suppression would exist would be to prevent some people from participating. And the only reason why you would do that is because you want to retain the power that you currently have, and you want to prevent other people from having a say. And that means that all of you on this webinar right now are the target of voter suppression. If you are a young person, you are a target of voter suppression, meaning they don't want a world in which you have a say. And to be really clear, this past season in the primaries, that showed up with something even as traditional as poll workers, where in places like Milwaukee and in Kentucky, huge poll worker shortages meant that in certain communities, there was only one poll worker, one poll site for every county in Kentucky, for example. Only 5 in all of Milwaukee. And this time there's going to be a 250,000 poll worker shortage because of COVID. Most of the poll workers are elderly and vulnerable. And so it's actually on all of us to step up and to be poll workers on election day. And Javier, I'm so inspired by your company and Levi Strauss actually making election day possible for people to participate. And poll workers don't have to be necessarily eligible to vote in their area. So in some states, you can do it before you're 18. In some states, you don't even have to live there to be a poll worker. So I really encourage everybody to take election day and be a poll worker. And that is one of the most important helpful things you can do to combat voter suppression, and make sure that as many polling locations are available as possible, so people don't have to travel all the way across the county or all the way across the city to just participate on election day. Many people don't actually have the ability to vote by mail. It's very difficult for certain communities, especially if you're on a Native American reservation, et cetera. And so it's really important that we have as much access to polling locations as possible on election day.
That is very key, Mike. Thank you. And you just gave me the perfect segue into our next question, which I'm going to direct towards Caitlin and Javier. You know, we tend to see voting as an individual act, but it affects the community at large. And when your community votes, your community has a much bigger voice. You know, and so one of the things that I wanted to ask was, how can somebody continue to help out their community after the election and, you know, spread that awareness? Javier, I'll throw it to you first.
Great. That's an interesting question. I think that elections are not just a one-day thing. It's a year-round, and making sure that, one, that you casted your vote and that you follow up with your elected officials to firm on the promises they made and to hold them accountable. Like, we're reaching a point that no longer elected officials get to pass on, I just got elected and then I'll just don't worry about it, just get reelected next 2 years. There's a lot of accountability going through the process right now. And we see more and more elected officials paying attention to what young people have to say and what we think and what we want. As long as we keep voting and making sure that we show up on election day, they will have no reason why to keep ignoring us. And then I saw a question on the chat that kind of links to this, and like, how do you keep those conversations and start those conversations without making it political? So after election day, you know, you make sure that you talk to your family members about issues you care about, whether it's climate, whether it's, I don't know, community, like in San Francisco, there's a housing shortage, rent control issue, there's a homelessness, like talk about the issues. Those are not, tend to be less political, but those are issues that are on the ballot implicitly, like whether it's a ballot measure, whether it's an elected official, they just have those conversations. They don't have to be about a particular party. They could be about an idea. There's an idea in the ballot. There's a person that believes this. Like, make sure that you have those conversations. Don't be afraid of it. Be a lot of patience. Show up to your Thanksgiving dinner with a lot of patience, and be you know, prepared to have those conversations. Don't be afraid of it. And that's something you could do year round. That would be my thinking on that one.
Thank you, Javier. I would like to add a little bit to that. And first I'll say that every community is different. So, you know, you're gonna wanna take context into account, like, very greatly. So these are just like some standards that I found as someone who is younger and has like moved around a little bit. These are like some standards that I like to follow in terms of like becoming involved and how to support the community, which is, if you want to support community, you need to convene with community first. So asking yourself, what communities are you a part of? Like your town or your school or your church? Like, what communities do you already have relationships built there? So first thing would be to find out where people are talking and what's happening. So if you aren't already engaged, like, find out where there's meetings happening, find out who's attending those meetings and what's going on. So kind of similar to before, how we suggested, like, if you don't know what's exactly on the ballot, maybe finding an organization that you trust, like the ACLU, and looking at their recommendations. I would even argue maybe researching those a little bit further yourself if possible. But similarly, I would argue that one should find a local organization that they trust, who is probably already has some particular asks. So you want to listen to the dialogue before you just jump in and kind of, again, understand the context under which you're entering if you aren't already acquainted with this organization or this body. And then once people start identifying solutions, inserting yourself where appropriate to offer what you have. So it may be, I have a car and I can offer people rides to the polls. It may be that I have a good relationship in my community and I know all of my neighbors, which in some places is very rare. And I could actually work on handing out some flyers to some people in my neighborhood around voter registration guidelines or what's on our particular ballot and when there are community meetings happening around this. So whatever the case may be, right? Identify what it is that you have to bring to the table. And then when that's offered up as an opportunity, jump in and insert yourself. If the community is already organized, which likely they are, again, they're going to have an idea of what exactly it is that they need done. Usually organizers are pretty specific in what they want to accomplish and how they want to get there. So again, it can be intimidating entering into that context, but if you just come in with good intentions, you're willing to listen, you're willing to be wrong and be corrected, I think that's a really great way to jump in. And the last thing I'll say is just have an honest conversation with yourself about the level of involvement you want to have and what you want to bring to the table. Don't bring on a responsibility that you can't deliver. So really ask yourself, like, is talking, you know, I have great relationships with my neighbors. Is talking to people for hours at a time a strong suit that I have? You know, really dig deep and identify what it is you're willing to contribute, because you don't want to offer something that you can't deliver. Especially a lot of organizations are small. They're built on people, you know, doing what they can and taking on those responsibilities. So just be mindful about the space you take up. And if you say you're going to do something, do it. So those are my recommendations.
Those are some great recommendations. And, you know, I know how we were talking about Election Day is not always considered a holiday. Luckily for those of us at NSHSS, our president has graciously allowed us to take Election Day as a holiday this year. So, and with all of us being involved, we took that step as a company ourselves So all it takes is just, having one person be able to start that conversation sometimes, and it really gets the ball rolling. And, wanted to move on, Reba and Mike, I'm going to direct this next question to the both of you. We kind of touched on what do you need to know about voting, what you need to have and be prepared to handle when you go to the polls. But what about for those members of ours who aren't of age yet? Maybe they're underage. Maybe, they won't turn 18 before election day. My question to you both, and we'll start with Reba. My question is, what can somebody do who is underage to help during an election season? And then what can they do after it's over?
I love this because there are things everyone can do at any age. I'll let Mike speak to pre-registration, but you can pre-register before you're 18. Aside from voting itself, you can volunteer in so many different ways. You can do it remotely. You can be on the ground. There are so many things that you can do of most any age. As Javier said, with poll workers too, you don't always have to be 18 and registered to vote to be a poll worker. So definitely look into that as an option. Vote writers, we have a lot of volunteer opportunities. And again, because we provide IDs to people who need them to vote, our work extends beyond the election. So we're primarily focused about voter ID laws and strict ID states, but it's also really hard to get around in the country without an ID. We've also found that some locations testing for COVID won't test you unless you have a photo ID. So helping people be engaged in their community throughout an election cycle and beyond is important. And the last thing I'll say is, aside from elections, again, whatever age you are, you need to hold people accountable. So if someone ran on a platform saying they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and they're not doing that, you need to protest. You need to write letters. You need to get mad. You need to make phone calls and emails. Be an annoying bug in that office, and make sure that you hold them to it.
Yeah, hear on everything you just said, Reba. And I think especially for young people who aren't necessarily going to be 18 by the election, they're kind of asking, well, is this election for me? Is this a moment where I can participate? And the answer is absolutely. We have so many student volunteers and student ambassadors who are a part of our DM campaign. So they came up with this idea to use Instagram to direct message students across the country to register them to vote. And they don't have a vote themselves, some of them, but they wanted to basically have many votes by encouraging more people to get registered. And so just in the last 2 months, they've sent over 100,000 direct messages on Instagram to students around the country and have registered over 1,000 students. And these are lots of students who aren't yet able to vote themselves, but are registering and engaging students around the country who are. And they came up with the idea themselves. So you all know what you're thinking about. You know where you are. We are desperately trying to figure out where young people are so we can meet them where they're at and help them register. You all know that already. You'll come up with the best ideas that campaigns will have ever thought about. And as you're doing all of this, you'll realize that there's not actually an age where you can start paying attention to elections. It's from whatever age you're at. And we've had student volunteers who are not even in high school yet, who have been pressuring their school to register all of their parents during open houses and enrollment, and including the voter registration form in one of the enrollment forms that schools are having parents fill out. There's all sorts of ways that you can push your school or your community to incorporate voter registration as part of the process. Again, because we don't have it as an automatic part of the process, we have to figure out ways to get people registered and involved. And that can be anybody at any age, in any status, who's pushing to make sure that that happens. And then once November 4th happens, exactly as Reba said, start again. And I think we often find ourselves in this cycle where maybe every 4 years people start paying attention and we have to ramp up and register everybody to vote. But our whole vision is for My School Votes teams in schools to be as synonymous as your chess club or your Model UN team or your robotics team or whatever it is, so that every single year you're registering everybody who's eligible. And what we actually found in affluent schools, that's what they do anyway. And everybody just gets registered when they graduate high school without even talking a lot about it. And so we want that true for every school, because if you register to vote by the time you're 18, you are dramatically more likely to be a lifelong voter, even than if you wait till just your 19th birthday. It's like when you buy a new car and you drive it off the lot, the value goes down a bunch just from that one moment. And if you don't start with allowing yourself to register that first time, then a lot of young people don't see themselves as voters. And so it's really important that everybody gets registered that first time, and that we're trying to help everyone register every year, so that we then don't have to register a bunch of 19, 20, 21-year-olds for the first time every 4 years. So it's so important that it's institutionalized and that it's every single year, so that we don't have to ramp up in these huge ways when there's a presidential election.
Too right you are, Mike. And speaking of every 4 years, you know, we know that there is a lot of news and a lot of noise that gets made about presidential elections, but far too often, those aren't really the big ones that affect our day to day. So I'm going to toss this question to Javier and Abnerline. We'll start with Javier. How important are local elections and midterms and primaries? Why do they matter? Why should we participate in those?
Yeah, I think local elections, at least for example, in San Francisco, they happen at least twice every year. And they're even more important than presidentials to me. They're from city taxes, from state taxes, from ballot measures, local judges, district attorney generals, you name it. And they're particularly the city ones are where you get to say where you want school funding to go, where you want, in San Francisco, particularly the issue on housing, it's pretty big. Our rents are among the highest in the US, so you want to make sure that you're having a say there for rent control measures, for low-income housing building, to make sure that the community builds itself back, because we've been struggling to control the issue of homelessness with all the intake of wealthy employees coming with the growth of the tech sector. I would say that every year election is even more important than a presidential. Of course, a presidential has long-term consequences, but from your day-to-day life, I would say that voting in local elections have more of a say impacting everyday life than any other.
I definitely agree with everything you just said. I think local elections, I think a lot of it is disregarded, and people are like, oh, the president. I'm like, okay, but your state senator is running. And it's like, it's very important, because I feel like a lot of change needs to happen in our own communities before we can look at it nationally. And I'm not saying that you can't look past that, but I think it's important to also see what's going on in your own community, and being first and front center in your own community, and voting for those people who want what's best for the community. I mean, there's a lot of people, those people are the people who decide, how much money you'll get, what type of books you'll get at school, and what kind of, you'll get broken laptops or new laptops, and those are the things that affect us, especially as students, education, different things, how much money goes on people who will use SNAP benefits and stuff like that. It's like, you have to pay attention to these things, because those are the things that affect you. And a lot of it, and the end goal does affect what happens in the presidential election. And it's important to look at it from a viewpoint, whereas I'm making a change in my community that can hopefully have a big impact nationally. And when you focus on what's in front of you, most of the time, other states look at you and you're like, oh, they're doing great, maybe we should also look at them and see what we can do better. And like, just being a role model in your own state. I mean, I'm doing an internship right now for my state senator, and it's the little things that matter in your community. It's the little, like, going to the small businesses and checking up on them and, you know, seeing how they're doing. It's those things that, you know, affect us in the long term, and making sure that everyone's okay. And, you know, especially with COVID-19 right now, and, you know, your governor is deciding how you're going to go back to school, and, you know, things like that that affect you daily. And it's like, you know, you have to pay attention to these things, because not only does it affect you, but it affects everyone in your community. And I do believe that local elections are something that definitely needs more attention. um, Definitely needs to be talked about more in school. I feel like all we ever talk about is the presidential election, and not the local elections in our, you know, our town or our city or whatever it is. And it's like, but there's so many things that, you know, that we want, but it's like, how do we get it? And it's like, vote for the people that you think is best, that can help your community, that can help your, you know, your state. And it's just something that definitely needs more conversating and just attention. I can't believe it's not something that's, you know, that's not, you know, as large as the presidential election. And I get it, you know, every 4 years. It's exciting also to see who's gonna, you know, lead us as a country, but I feel like it's also important to see who's gonna lead you in tomorrow in your schools, in your towns, you know, and just also paying attention to that.
Definitely. Go ahead, Reba.
Just to add on to what Javier and Aberline have been saying, even non-presidential elections impact the presidential election. So when you are voting for your state legislatures, they are the ones who are responsible for redistricting. And if you want your presidential vote to count, you want to make sure that you are holding those people accountable when they are setting up redistricting laws, or putting in effect strict voter ID laws that will reduce certain communities from voting for the president. So all year round, there are elections going on in your community. It's important.
Definitely. I'm a Southerner, so my grandmother always used to say that change begins at the kitchen table, as a way of saying that, you know, it starts, you know, right at home. And a lot of times it's just simply talking to your peers and talking to your family and your community about, you know, what you want the world to look like, and then supporting those candidates that show that sense of change. And just a reminder, you know, if anybody has any additional questions that they want to ask to any of our panelists or to the panel at large, please feel free to put that into the Q&A box down there at the bottom. But we're going to move on to another question. And this one's kind of a quick answer that I want everybody to answer. So who do we think has the power in a democracy? Is it the people or the leaders? Caitlin, we'll start with you.
I feel like it's hard to give a short answer, but I would say in short, the people.
Javier?
Power to the people.
Reba?
Power to the people. I'm with you.
Abnerline?
The people.
Mike?
You don't let your mother dress you every day, so you shouldn't let her decide who you should vote for.
I like that. I like that. Oh, and it looks like we are getting some questions in. So this one I'm gonna toss. I'll let whoever wants to answer this one. Why is it important to participate in the census? 2020 is a census year. What does that mean? Why is it important? Who wants to answer that one?
I can take a stab. So the census counts in many ways, whether it's the numbers used for redistricting, whether it's for population surveys, for federal programs, allocations from Congress, anything that goes back into the community, those are the numbers used for it. Traditionally, there's an undercount of people of color, so it's very important that those populations get counted as well, to make sure that you don't lose representation, you don't lose federal programs, you don't lose your voice in Congress. So that's my number one priority. It's funny because I have a big sign out of my window that says, fill out the census 2020. So I wake up and I see it every day. It takes 3 minutes. So if you've seen that postcard in your house, make sure your parents fill it out and return it.
Yeah, it's very quick. For sure, for sure. All right, looks like we've got, all right. Okay, so this is one that we've gotten once or twice. Essentially, you know, a lot of people, especially first-time voters, are very apathetic with the current political climate and kind of government at large. And they have a big fear that their vote isn't going to count or it's not going to change anything. You know, and they want to be able to put the power behind their vote. So, you know, what are kind of some of the ways that we can change that mindset to view voting in a more positive manner? Who wants to take a stab at that? I feel like Mike, maybe.
Sure, I'll start, and then Abnerline, I'll kick it to you because it seems like you've got something cooked up to say there. But I think one of the things that I was talking about earlier is so important. For a long time, the messaging around voting was that voting is the end all be all, that it's the most important thing you can do, that it's so powerful. All of these messages that just don't resonate with young people who have a really good BS detector and say, wait a second, that doesn't seem right. And even, you know, some of you may remember the Vote or Die campaign that Diddy put out there with no research at all, that actually made it less likely that people turned out to vote who heard that, because it felt so fatalistic and heavy. You know, voting doesn't have to be this big serious thing that we then make it feel like it's got to change the world or else it didn't matter. Like we were talking about before, it's just one thing that you will do in combination with a bunch of other things that you're going to do to try and change the world. And just like I said before, you don't want older people who are, you know, making decisions about the world right now to keep making the decisions for you. You wouldn't let them choose what music you listen to. You wouldn't let them choose what you wore. You wouldn't let them choose where you end up going to college, right? So why would you have them have the only say in what happens in our country? And so I think some of it is about how we frame this. And in the past, we've made it seem so heavy. And also we've tried to convince people that your one vote can change the world. And it just doesn't resonate with young people. And so that's why, Abnerline, I'm going to kick it to you, because we're actually going to launch a big campaign called Vote Loud next week. And you said that exact phrase next time, but it's be active loud, protest loud, you know, do everything loud, because that's just who you are.
100%. I think it's also having positive people surrounding you. I think that's something that a lot of people don't talk about, is having people that are interested in what you're interested in, and just having, you know, people that care about things that you care about, people that care about, you know, changing their communities or researching and stuff like that. Because then that makes you feel better, you know, having conversations with your friends about things you want to see in the world, and not talking about, you know, whatever TikTok trend is going on. And I'm not saying you can't talk about these things, because they're regular things people talk about, but I think it's also important to surround yourself with people who are change makers, people who really care about, you know, things that are going on, and, you know, just immerse yourself in it, and don't be afraid to, you know, try out other things. You know, voting is just one option. Try other things. You know, protesting sometimes is not for everybody, but you can do something with art, you can do something with your music. There's so many pathways that you can use to, you know, voice your opinion and bring change into your communities or whatever aspect there is. So, you know, just keep an open mind and open perspective. And I think, you know, a lot of that self, you know, doubt of, you know, not being able to change will just slowly disappear, and you won't even realize it, because that happened to me a lot. You know, I'm doing things and I'm like, whoa, okay, you know, because I'm so sucked in and just going after it and just doing what I have to do, because at the end of the day, I'm the change that I want to see. and I'm the future. I'm the generation. Everyone behind me is going to go away, and it's going to take me to step up and do what I have to do, because at the end of the day, it's me who's next. And I think having that mindset, surrounding yourself with people who have that mindset, asking questions, doing research. It might not be fun sometimes, but just because you might find out things that you don't like, and you're like, okay, don't want to do this anymore. But it's motivation. It's motivation to keep going, to wanting to change things that you want to see. So just be open-minded. Don't let your fear thinking that you can't do what you want to do, because you actually can once you put your mind to it.
Absolutely. And, regardless of what side you fall for, which candidate you want to vote for, what have you, more than anything, it is incredibly important you vote, period. That is the main goal here, and that we want to make sure that everybody gets that across for sure. So as we we're honing in a little bit on that 8:30 time. So as we get close, I'm going to give each of our panelists a quick 30 seconds to a minute or so. Throw out your last thoughts. What are some things that, you want to leave behind with some of our attendees here to make sure that they check out? And we'll go back in order. I'll start with Reba.
I'm going to also fold in a question about how to enable more people who are released from prisons to vote, because I think this is also specific action that can be taken. There's a few things that can be done. One is some states and governors make it so that if you are released, you have all of your rights restored. All you have to do is register or re-register. Other states make it very hard. And in some states like California, one of the items coming up on the ballot is making sure that formerly convicted persons are able to vote easily. We saw that pass in Florida in the last major election, but then we also saw essentially a poll tax put in place on that, which is saying that, yeah, former felons can vote in Florida, but only if they pay off all of these licenses and fees. So that has gone to court. My point is, there are a lot of great resources to help make sure that if you are in a state where you can help people, it also takes some effort. I actually spoke with a gentleman who was in prison for 34 years. Just this week I talked to him, and he got his rights restored, but he doesn't have means to get an ID. So we're working with him to make sure he has an ID and can register. So just to reiterate, there are things you can do in an election year and outside of it, but get involved, get engaged.
Okay, perfect. All right, we'll toss it over to Mike. What are some last thoughts, Mike?
So my last parting thought is, if you want to extend beyond yourself and either multiply your vote, or you're not yet eligible and you want to register a bunch of other people, I just put in a chat. If you go to myschoolvotes.whenweallvote.org, you can create your own voter registration page that tracks how many people you've registered to vote. And it's really cool. You can send it around to your friends and register as many of them as possible and see a counter of how many people that you've registered. And so my big closing thing is for you all to think about not just does your vote matter, but does your voice matter? And you show that your voice matters in so many different ways every day. And this is just one more way that you can share your voice and have your voice heard. And so that's my big closing thing, is that this is all about having your voice being heard.
Absolutely. Got to make that voice count. Javier, what do you want to leave us with?
Sure. I'm going to throw in a challenge to what Mike was saying. My personal count a few election cycles ago was, in the span of 3 months, I think I registered 34 friends. So use that as a margin. Beat me by all means. And yeah, don't feel afraid. Like, if you can't vote on this one, make sure that you pre-register. There's If you can pre-register as 16-year-old in your state, please do so, and then rally your whole class around it. And then you don't have to worry about it. So make sure you do your part, because on that note that Reba was talking about, the voter enfranchisement movement in Florida, there was a hard-fought battle. That ballot measure lost, I think, 3 times, and then on the 4th time it passed by 3/4 of the vote. It had support from all parties. It finally made it. The politicians are now trying to do a pay-to-vote system, but there's a big coalition, and we're starting to move some companies to also fundraise to cover those fines. So there's a lot of people making sure that every vote actually gets counted and everybody gets to vote. But as long as you do your part, if you feel like my vote doesn't count, that's why things like this fail. And then make sure that, you know, you do your part. People are gonna keep pushing and pushing and pushing, but if too many of us fail, we're not gonna get there, but we'll promise we'll get there.
That's right, we will. Abnerline, hit us.
Okay, so I saw a question in the chat about, being youth and having to change the world can lead to like stress and overwhelming thoughts. So what I'm going to say is mental health 100 times over, because that is one of the most important things, especially when you're doing this type of work or you're just looking at it on the news. Sorry, it's always important to just step back if you need to, and just take a day, take years if you need to, because honestly, this is something that as children, it's hard seeing, things like this in our world, in our society, and it's not things that, we should see. We should just, I just want to go to school sometimes and just be a kid, but instead I'm trying to figure out how to do other things, and I understand it can be very difficult, and you can still be a kid and still, find ways to improve your community. It doesn't have to be either or, but one thing I will tell you is if you need a mental health break, if you need to take, time away from everything that you're seeing, because it's serious stuff. It's not, lighthearted stuff. And I think society is sometimes is so pressured on just like sharing this and sharing that, and a lot of it is like traumatizing, and it's like, and it's a lot of it, it's like some people can't handle. Sometimes it's like, I can't watch this because it's not things that are normal. And our society is so pushed over, like, look at this, this is crazy news, breaking news, and it's like no one's taking into account of people's mental health and trauma and the trauma that they endured looking at these things. And so always checking with your mental health, checking with your friends, your coworkers, see how they're doing, because people have feelings, people are going through things either than, the things that we're seeing. And it's important to just, step back, because a lot of this can develop anxiety and a lot of depression, especially in the times of COVID-19, where a lot of people are struggling with their mental health because they can't interact with people anymore. It's like, I can't hug you, I can't kiss you, I can't do anything, because it's just something that's crazy in the last 6 months. And I think it's important that we, stay in touch with our physical and our mental health, because they both coincide, and just really try and do the best that you can do. You're number one. Your brain, your body is number one before anything. So make sure you take care of yourself. If you need a break off social media, take it. Take a break. Do whatever you need to do to feel better, to feel ready to take on whatever it is that you want to. But make sure that that's something that you put first before anything else. So mental health, everyone.
Definitely. It's important to make sure that you keep check of yourself and you make sure that you're doing okay too, because you can't pour from an empty cup. You got to make sure that you take care of you first, and then you can take care of the world from there. And lastly, that leaves us with Caitlin. Drop us some closing knowledge.
Thanks. So my closing thoughts are just on like a final plea to vote, which is just, regardless of whether or not we agree with the policies, practices, operations, or even existence of our various political and governmental institutions, they do exist and they have very real and immediate consequences. And we have to be strategic and varied in our efforts. And voting is a singular and important piece of that puzzle, but it's not the only pieces of the puzzle, as Mike has so eloquently put many times. We can't lose sight of the larger picture of the communities we want to build and the other avenues of pursuing it, like direct community engagement, so volunteering, protesting, all of those. All of these forms of engagement are incredibly important, and unfortunately, each of them have their own unique barriers, whether that's people who have exceptionalities or undocumented folks or folks with felonies, whatever the case may be. So I think it's important that while we stress engagement and all of these practices that we're talking about, we work to also remove the barriers for folks who haven't been given adequate access to these institutions, to these opportunities, and to representation within them. So I just want to make a final plea to say, remember, it's not about electing your favorite person of all time who has all of the most perfect policies that you agree with. Again, to remain nonpartisan, but Angela Davis speaks to this a lot and says, sometimes what's best is to just vote for the person who you can apply the most pressure to and hold accountable. So just please, everyone, vote. Again, even if it's not all sunshine and rainbows. And if you don't feel great about the people you have to vote for, there's plenty of other ways to be involved outside of just your vote. So those are my final thoughts.
Too right you are, Caitlin. And you know, if you end up not liking anybody on the ballot, then you get to pressure your friends and your family and other people that are of age to maybe run for office themselves. You can always put that as a goal for yourself, you know, in the future. So you've got all kinds of different options. Rome wasn't built in a day, so you got to give it a chance to get that foundation underneath it. But we're going to close out here real quick with just a little bit of some information here. I'm going to go ahead and give just a little bit more information going on about NSHSS itself. And here we go. All right, so as I mentioned at the top of the program, this panel is part of our World Betterment Initiative. So NSHSS is striving to help make the world a better place for each and every one of us through a series of different topics. We've already had our How to Be an Advocate panel, where we talked about racial and social justice, and you can find that on past events on the NSHSS site. We also do have a Why Vote scholarship. So not only can you get registered to vote, you can win money for college for it. So we are giving away $1,000 to 10 winners who have registered to vote and are spreading the good news about why it's important. So make sure you check out the scholarships there. And we also have introduced a brand new Be More Fund of over, it's a $10,000 grant for 10 winners. So if you created a nonprofit, got a great prototype idea, have a great idea for how to make the world a better place, submit your proposal. We want to hear it. We want to help out any way we can. And again, a couple of those scholarship opportunities popping up here. We do have a diversity initiatives grant. So any educators out there who, you know, maybe are making the world a better place little by little in their diverse classrooms, we want to help you out. So make sure you check that out. And we know that this generation has been very vocal and very active in protests and advocating for change. So we want to award that as well. So we have that opportunity there as well. So make sure you check out the scholarships page at NSHSS. We also do have the NSHSS Foundation, which is committed to targeting outstanding, diverse, and underdeserved students. So whether you have a passion for the economy or the environment, we want to be able to help you out. So if you would like to make a tax-deductible contribution, we do have that opportunity as well at nshssfoundation.org. These are just a couple of our scholarship recipients. So we always want to say that we want to add your face to our wall of fame here. So make sure you check out those as well. Once again, my name is Nikki I, and I'm the Scholarships and Communications Manager. This has been our Why Vote panel, and I want to say thank you to each and every one of our panelists for taking part in our discussion tonight. make sure you go out to get registered to vote. Make sure you vote. And if you can't vote, get in your car and drive people to the polls, because that's an easy way to do that too. But thank you, everyone.